The paradise beaches of Southeast Asia were altered forever on December the 26th, 2004.
I look at the sea and I see horrible things.
The word hell kind of comes into my mind.
250,000 people died here 10 years ago in moments of horror that are seared on the minds of survivors.
You are aware that life can change immediately in a split second.
Our life absolutely was destroyed on that day.
The sea betrayed the trust of those who made a living on its shores.
I see this bad thing happen to the world. I just felt like the world wasn't really happy.
And that left a legacy of grief and guilt that has changed lives forever.
You wonder how they ever cope, really, with the loss.
This is the story of the Boxing Day tsunami and how the survivors have lived through a decade of suffering and healing.
The night before, we had spent on the beach watching all the turtles hatch. So again, that was a magical Christmas day. That was Christmas Day. We hadn't had much to eat, had we? We'd had everything we'd eaten what we wanted. It was really nice. I think Isabella just had chips with tomato ketchup for her Christmas Day dinner. That's all she wanted. It was like chips.
There's a full moon, and the island is so gone so quiet, so peaceful. There's a restaurant setting up, right? You know that people go out for Christmas dinner, they wear white. And this look amazing. It's like heaven.
I knew that we would end up at PP or on one of the islands for New Year's Eve to party. And I looked in the book and I found this place, Khao Lak, which was a 2-3 hour drive from Phuket by bus, and decided that's where I want to go.
December 26, 2004 dawned a perfect morning on the shores of Southeast Asia.
You sort of imagine a disaster like this to be in appalling weather and driving rain and howling gales, and it was just the most perfectly tranquil day.
But while the tourists breakfasted and sunbathed and swam, the people of Banda Aceh in Indonesia were already living a nightmare.
I can see the wall of my bathroom in my house. It's kind of like swinging around. Every time you try to standing, it will fall down again to the ground. And I can see on the street is full of my neighbors. Everybody just out of the house.
The undersea earthquake that triggered the tsunami was the third biggest ever recorded. The shift in the sea floor pushed up the ocean surface, generating a wave that raced towards the coast. Banda Aceh was just 100 miles from that epicenter. And just 15 minutes later, cameraman Dendi Montgomery was filming the earthquake damage.
The first water is coming like this. Just still not believing what happened. And then when the water just coming from behind the building like this, like around 10 meters something, it's like, okay, I need to go from here.
Dendi jumped into his open Jeep with his wife, who carried on filming. More than 20 people piled in behind them.
All the river on that time is full with the, dead body, some of survivor, houses, everything on the river.
That wave is a good 15, 20 feet tall. Easy.
Over the next few hours, the tsunami would crash over coastlines from Southeast Asia to East Africa, in some places coming in up to 30 feet high. In Khao Lak in southern Thailand, people started filming the strange sight of the water being sucked away down the beach. But as the wave roared back, they realized they were filming scenes of death. In a beachside bungalow, Amanda Rabau was in bed with her boyfriend Daryl.
I remember sitting up going, well, what on earth is that noise? And he got up and he opened the curtains and he had a look of horror on his face.
The building collapsed and the couple was swept out into a torrent of water, choked with debris.
I got crushed backwards against this wall, and then everything else just started crushing back and rising up above my head. So as well as pushing me backwards, it then started to push me under. And then I remember, I just remember taking my last breath before I went under. And then I just remember thinking, I hope it's quick. And then something pulled on my hand. And this man, he pulled me out between this really small gap.
Another wave washed Amanda back into the churning water. For 3 hours, she fought for her life. When the water receded, she was surrounded by bodies, including the man who had saved her.
I have a lot of questions in my head in life, whether you do the right thing by someone. He should have survived, because he saved my life, without a doubt.
Off the coast on the island of Phi Phi, Luke Simon was having breakfast with his brother Piers and 3 friends when people started to run, screaming through the cafe.
I looked round to my left, and the horizon that I was used to seeing of market, tree canopies, and then, the sea out beyond was just boiling in front of me.
Phi Phi's 2 back-to-back bays were hit simultaneously by waves, engulfing the thin strip of land between. Tuliwan Promli, or Pim, was the owner of a local business in Phuket. She was packing to leave after taking a break on the island.
I saw that huge wave is about half of the coconut tree. It's driving into me like, oh, and that noise, and people scream, and I close my eye. I think, I can't do anything. I did.
Luke Simon managed to scramble onto a roof. His brother Piers was left on the ground. He was trying to push their friend Sophie to safety.
I watched the sort of sludge and all the debris literally just go up her body, over her head and over her hand, and I was pulling at this hand under the water, and I just shouted, let go, and shouted, you have to try and go down.
I go over the roofs and over the edge, and with the fence, tall fence, and then to the trees. It's just happened just like that.
Luke's friend Sophie was spat out of the debris, and he was able to pull her free. But of Piers, there was no sign.
The tsunami really turned Phi Phi into canals. The little alleyways and the roadways and the streets became 2.5 metres deep in water, sort of supercharged, filled with debris. And when we found Piers, his neck was completely severed. So P was hit by glass or corrugated iron or something like that.
The noise of what people is suffering from the first wave is gone disappear, not so much. So the second wave is actually swallow them, so they're dead.
In the southern Sri Lankan city of Galle, the bus station was washed away in moments. Down the coast in Tangaul, Kim and Tristan Peatfield were on holiday with their 5-year-old daughter, Isabella.
I was swept outside and I hang on to the porch, but it was a big biblical, almost like a CGI event from a film. And you just think, what the hell is happening? You're trying to logicalise it, and you're trying to get back into the room to help Isabella and Kim.
Tristan was washed into the lagoon behind the hotel, but Kim was trapped inside with Isabella.
I wasn't holding her because I was holding the wall, and she just got her face into my chest. And again, I just didn't know where you were, and I was just thinking, where is he? I need help. I can't hold her.
The force of the water swept Kim and Isabella out of the building.
I must have been knocked out, and I guess that's when I let her go, because I don't remember letting her go. I would never have let her go, but I did. I'd rather have died with her in her arms.
As the water receded, survivors were emerging from the debris. Many were horribly injured, others desperately searching for children, husbands, wives, siblings, and friends.
It was sort of like the first time I'd sort of looked at myself and had just wood hanging out of my body.
And I thought you were dead, and I knew Isabella was dead. I knew there was no way. I knew at that point she was dead, because I'd heard her scream and I hadn't seen her. And then I just lay down the road and I would have died then. If somebody had come along and shot me, I don't want to die then.
In the first hours after the tsunami, those who survived only had one another to turn to. Ordinary holidaymakers and local people, teachers like Luke, local business owners like Pim, these people became leaders, forced into roles completely outside their normal lives.
We spent the next 6 hours until sort of dusk at 7 p.m. Doing first aid on people, and then walking around the groups, sort of seeing if Piers had made his way up. Most of the people up on that higher ground where we were sort of on standby. It was like when the TV's on but it's not, and they were like that. Their body had just sort of said, actually, we'll zone out for a bit.
With no medical training, Pim became part of a triage team that treated the injured before outside help arrived.
And it's calling like help and here and crying. I'm pain, it's my leg, and people calling like they suffer.
When the helicopters finally came, Pim had to make life or death decisions about who would be evacuated first. Decisions which haunted her for the next 10 years.
I thought this pregnant lady, she looked a little bit better than the other man. So I said, that man go first. She died on the chopper. I felt guilty for 10 years about this case.
In the chaos of Sri Lanka, local people who had lost everything went out of their way to reunite Kim and Tristan and to get Kim to hospital.
Absolutely. Pandemonium. Bodies, people, screaming, blood. It was horrendous.
The most awful decision to make is what do? You look after your damaged wife, or find your daughter. And that's a really, really, really horrible decision to make.
Yeah. Yeah. No.
Kim's injuries were so serious that she was taken to Colombo for treatment. Only then were they told that Isabella's body had been found by a woman at the resort.
She found her body, didn't she? And then she knew that we'd been shipped up to Colombo, so she arranged for the body to be sent up to Colombo. But it was ever so confused. It was a nightmare, wasn't it? But then that's what that's the nightmare you went through then, trying to find Isabella's body.
By now, the outside world was starting to get a sense of what the survivors had been living through.
You're watching Sky News live at 5 from Phuket in Thailand. The awful scale of the tsunami that caused such devastation around the Indian Ocean became all too clear today.
The first news reports brought a shuddering stop to Christmas celebrations.
Around 9:25 on Boxing Day morning, Katagora changed forever. The village was hit by a wall of water with a force so great it crushed almost everything before it.
JP Lalita was one of those who survived in the ruins of Katagora. 10 years after the wave, she still lives in the village, a few hundred meters from the sea which destroyed her life. Lalita lived, but one of her daughters was found dead. Her second daughter died later in hospital. More than 800 people died in Katagora. Along the coasts of Sri Lanka, thousands of families were enduring the same grief.
How do you explain to a people that God loves you, God cares for you? It's difficult.
In Thailand, it wasn't until the third day that rescue teams reached Khao Lak.
Local people say more than 2,000 people could have lost their lives there.
Amanda and her boyfriend Daryl, with other survivors, had been waiting for help for days.
All through the night we could hear helicopters and sirens and cars, and we thought, this is good, you know, in the morning we'll be rescued, people will come and get us. But that wasn't the case at all.
When the roads were finally cleared, they managed to get onto a bus to Bangkok.
I was sick for 14 and a half hours solidly. Brown water, and I don't know what was coming out of my body. I actually thought I was going to die.
British Ambassador David Fall had scrambled an emergency team to Phuket to deal with the crisis.
What we're increasingly concerned with, of course, is identification of victims, of the bodies, trying to find out where the British victims are. The tragedies were heart-rending, absolutely heart-rending. 2 young boys being brought into our office who'd lost their parents, effectively been orphaned. Parents, or a surviving parent, whose children had been torn out of their arms.
The message boards set up by survivors seeking lost relatives became a poignant symbol of grief and loss. It was here that Luke Simon started his search for his brother Piers.
Last night we found someone on Koh Lanta who was called Piers Simon. It was spelt with a Y rather than I in the surname. And when we managed to track him down at about midnight, it was just someone completely different.
10 years later, Buddhist chants drift through the temple of Yan Yao. After the tsunami, this was a mass morgue for many of the 4,000 dead from Khao Lak. In the first days, the bereaved searched through piles of bodies themselves. Alongside them were the volunteers, ordinary tourists who stayed on to help, bound by a common humanity.
Behind every body here, there's family. And if it was someone in my family, I'd like to know that if they were found and they were here, that they were taken care of in some way.
I'd worked as a doctor and I'd seen bodies before, but nothing of that scale.
Tinge Krishnan was visiting her mother in Phuket when the tsunami hit. She started organising teams of volunteers, but had increasing concerns for their mental welfare.
Volunteers are just going out and doing stuff that
is not appropriate for them to be doing. We went up to Yanya, which was the temple and the mass mortuary. People knew after a while that if they hadn't found people, they were not living.
After days of chaos, the Thai authorities introduced DNA checks, which were essential as the bodies became unidentifiable. But it meant that relatives were denied even the small comfort of taking a body home.
It was important that it should be done in their own interests, because if it is found, it's easy to say in their own interests. How can you explain that to somebody who's been through absolute hell and there's the terrible process of taking a wife or children's bodies back to the UK? But the bodies were very important.
We ended up camped around a computer watching a slideshow of dead bodies in various states of bloatedness, injuredness, severedness. Just, it wasn't a pleasant thing to do. And if a body had a green t-shirt on, we didn't look at it. I knew what Piers was wearing that day, his red t-shirt, my blue shorts. And we were watching this, and then body 348 came on, and it was a red Oakley t-shirt. And I looked at Ben and I said, "That's P."
Most estimates indicate every other person who used to live in this town is now dead.
In Indonesia, it was only when the first international military and charity teams arrived that the almost nuclear scale of the devastation was revealed.
As a journalist, I kind of like losing sense of reporting something because I don't know where to start. Everywhere is flat.
The number of dead in Aceh kept climbing relentlessly. It was impossible to treat the dead with respect. Each of these was the body of someone who had been loved, someone who had been cared for, now dumped in a mass grave, their name unknown.
I lost like a 50 member of my family, and even I can't find the dead body. Or I'm just thinking of that time, like all of my family member going to Mecca in one big group and never come back.
Almost a week after the wave, the world marked a muted New Year's Eve. And the survivors were returning.
I was in a group of 6, and me and my bag's the only thing that's coming back.
I knew I had to let go of one of them, and I just thought I'd better let go of the one that's the oldest. And a lady grabbed hold of him for a moment, but she said that she had to let him go because she was going under. And I was screaming, trying to find him, and we thought he was dead.
Still too ill to walk, Amanda was finally home. But over the coming months and years, it would prove hard to leave those memories behind.
There was a girl who I can't find. Her name was Matilda, and she was from Argentina, and we were in the sea together. And when it went under, she said, "Take my hand," and I said, "No, I can't," because I knew you can't hold on to someone. You've got to be strong and be on your own, and I didn't take her hand.
I felt like I should have died, and I didn't die, so I think you feel guilty. I felt guilty for surviving and someone else not having the chance to survive.
Surviving the Boxing Day tsunami was one thing. Once they got home, they had to learn to live with what had happened to them and what they had lost.
We still had all this love, all these masses of love, didn't we? Absolutely. And it was love, I think grief is tied in with love, and you've got this guilt, and it's very emotionally complex, but above all, there was just so much love, and we had nothing to do with all this love.
In the first year after the tsunami, many of the survivors struggled to deal with the grief and the guilt and the questions.
I see this bad thing happen to the world. I just felt like the world wasn't really happy. And I blame God, I blame everything.
Many were also suffering from post-traumatic stress.
I couldn't ever sleep. I didn't want to do anything. I was always a very outgoing person. The more dangerous something was, the more I wanted to do it. I was, but I reclused into a little girl again.
Every time I try to close my eyes, everything is just coming back, flashback in my mind.
I needed trauma counselling for, I had it 3 times a week for a long period of time, so it definitely had an impact. I think the human mind isn't really built to cope with that.
In spite of all that they had suffered, some felt inexorably drawn back.
I needed to understand what happened. I needed to gauge distances in my head of what actually happened to me that day.
We wanted to go back because there's obviously a big loss, a big gap. Losing a daughter is a big gap. And you wanted, I know, you were searching for something.
And it wasn't just for themselves that survivors wanted to return. Many were drawn back by their bond with the local people.
We didn't sit down and say, what's going to help us get over this loss, the most effectively. It was just really set the tone by those Thai people that helped us, that made us want to do something back.
I wanted to go back to Khao Lak, and I wanted to go back and thank the people, and I wanted to go back to see if I could find the family of the man who I still think saved my life.
Aid was already pouring into the region, and charities like UNICEF knew they had enough money to be able to help.
I think the fact that it was Christmas meant that people were at home, and they were sitting in front of the television, a lot of them, and they could see what was happening. They were with their own families, and they could see families on the other side of the world being broken apart and destroyed.
The disaster had inspired the biggest ever charity fundraising in the UK.
It was fantastic to know, even after just a few weeks, that we would have enough money to do the things that needed to be done in all of the countries that were hit.
3 months after the tsunami, Amanda was back in Khao Lak, after raising more than £50,000 simply by telling her story.
There was a massive community of people that were there that I didn't expect to find there, but there were, and there were people there that were in back braces still, that were so injured still, but were there to help.
Luke Simon was determined to channel his grief into making something positive come out of Piers' death. At his brother's memorial service, he launched the Piers Simon Appeal.
I very, crudely put some Tupperware containers around the venue. A friend of mine persuaded us to print off some gift aid forms. And that evening, my mother and father and I counted up £10,000.
He went back to Thailand with the money and found huge numbers of volunteers working with local charities like Hai Pipi to clean up the island.
Thai people are very spiritual and a big belief in ghosts, and so a lot of them didn't want to be on the island. But Hai Pipi encouraged islanders back to the island. We, through our money that we donated, we paid them a wage to tidy up and clean.
It was children who'd been hardest hit by the tsunami. Many of those who survived had been orphaned, their communities destroyed.
I don't think I've been anywhere to any disaster situation where that kind of destruction of people has happened and where so many children have been left without their families.
It was the children of Sri Lanka that Kim and Tristan Peatfield wanted to help. Children like those Isabella had played with so happily in the last days of her life.
What we'd seen in Sri Lanka, well, anybody who was there would know that people just lost everything. Children didn't lose just a sibling or a parent or a grandparent or a roof over their heads. They literally lost everything, everything.
They used money given to them by friends to rebuild the children's ward in Tangall, and that was the start of the Isabella Peatfield Memorial Fund.
It's like this natural, organic thing. There was never a choice. It was just, what can we do to help? They need a new children's ward. That's how
we did.
And that's what happened, and that's how the charity came into fruition, really.
For the Peatfields, as for Luke Simon, the drive to make something positive come out of their grief led them to set up charities that would reshape their lives over the coming decade.
I didn't want From Memory to die. I didn't want all that amazingness about her to die.
You want to somehow fill a gap.
And that was a way of making sure she didn't die, that she was never going to die.
By the end of the year, thanks to the huge charity response and the individual efforts of survivors, the physical rebuilding was well underway. But it would be a much longer journey for some to heal their psychological scars.
I used to look out to the sea and just see a field of bodies and debris and rubble and horrible things. Likewise, I could close my eyes now and see all those things, but I try not to.
I think I need like more than a years maybe to going back, and actually I'm going to the beach and yelling as loud as I can on that time. I'm not scared anymore. Tsunami will not come anymore, you know, like try to tell to myself that you're okay.
Pim had nightmares in which she was haunted by the people she hadn't saved.
They grasp my legs and arms, they follow me. They say, why don't you help us? Why did you just ignore us? We also follow you. You help other people, but why not us?
After the tsunami, she found it impossible to work.
My colleagues, my partner in my company said that I'm mad. I run to help people and won't care about my business. I said, okay, I don't have any motivation to do business at the moment. I can't do, and I don't want to do it anymore.
Pim sold her business and left Thailand. She was to face years ahead of post-traumatic stress. In the end, she tried to take her own life. On the first anniversary, ceremonies were held across the region.
The culmination of the first anniversary commemorations was the release of Chinese lanterns into the sky, one for every victim of the tsunami in Thailand. There's over 5,000 lanterns just rising gently up into the night sky. And many people found that intensely moving, intensely emotional. A very cathartic experience for many people.
Ten years on, the rising of Banda Aceh from the wreckage of the tsunami is one of the few genuine positives that can be taken from the terrible events of Boxing Day 2004. Evacuation buildings now tower over the newly built city, guaranteed safe havens if the wave should ever return. And a system of buoys across the Indian Ocean will give early warning of an approaching tsunami.
I think now, after 10 years, we have enough education. I think, yeah, we keep trying to train about how to, escape, how to save from the disaster like that. So I think after that, after all the thing and after all the help to Banda Aceh, people back to life again.
The disaster brought about a peace agreement in the civil war that had riven Aceh for years. and the Indonesian government put one man in charge of organising the rebuild.
The magnitude of the devastation is unbelievably huge. You cannot live in a small tent for more than a week or two. Things will become very difficult for you to bear and living in that kind of condition.
Dr. Kuntoro was determined that all the families should have a home of their own within 2 years. But he was also determined that every penny of the millions donated would be spent on the people and to avoid corruption.
The UN, Red Cross, they come to Aceh and then they know where to go and what to do and what to build or do in that particular area, and let them do it by themselves, such that there is no money transfer between agencies.
Banda Aceh does not forget the Boxing Day tsunami. At the heart of the city stands the Tsunami Museum, testament to all the suffering. And memorials now mark the places where bodies were buried in mass graves. The main memorial in Thailand stands at Ban Nam Kem, on the headland near Khao Lak. At least 4,000 people died in Khao Lak, local people and tourists, all lost to the sea. Now families gather in the evening sun and fish by the little pier. A mile down the coast, the ruins of the Sofitel resort, where 300 people died, stood empty for years. Now the Marriott has been built in its place, at the centre of a thriving resort. The general manager is Ty Collins.
When I first came in the last 4 or 5 years, we needed to rebuild the awareness of Khao Lak as a destination. There's a lot of negative connotation with the name of Khao Lak, and so the success of our hotel has a big impact on the success of the community. Because we're the biggest, if we're able to do well, it cascades down to a lot of the other restaurants, taxi drivers, smaller hotels in the area.
In Phi Phi, the tourist boats are back and busy even out of season. But the memorials here are tucked away. This quiet garden is the place where hundreds of people died, unable to reach the safety of the hillside in time.
The last time I was there, I just felt immensely proud, actually, about what we managed to achieve in Pierce's name and in his memory.
We did a car wash and we did the Smarties pill, where we filled a Smarties tube with lots of money.
Luke Simon now works full-time on the charity that he set up in reaction to the death of his brother. But it's grown into School in a Bag, raising money to send school equipment to children affected by disaster.
If you've been involved in a natural disaster, you might have seen some really, really horrible things. We were born out of a natural disaster from a very, sad circumstance of losing my brother. And School in a Bag was initially helping poor children around the world, of which, as I've mentioned, there's a huge need. But I always wanted to be able to help disaster-affected children, mainly because of the experiences that I had picked up in the tsunami. I sort of still feel like Piers is with me now. I sort of feel like he's tagging along with me, except he's the reason we're doing it.
On the southern tip of Sri Lanka, a towering Buddha keeps watch over the ocean, a memorial to the 36,000 people who died on this island. It stands at the spot where the Gaul Express was smashed to pieces by the tsunami, killing 1,000 of the 1,500 people on board. Further down the Sri Lankan coast, 40,000 children have been treated in the last 10 years at the Isabella Peatfield ward at Tangle Hospital.
Our aim, our mission if you like, is to help a child smile, and even if that's just once a day, if they make a child smile, then we have changed that child's life for a little while.
The Isabella Peatfield charity has built 10 playgrounds, the latest here at the Canada Pura orphanage, set up for tsunami orphans.
The charity now, genuinely, has become an embodiment of her, of everything she was.
And there's been some happiness in the last decade to help them with the grief.
We had Louis, and he was due at the Christmas the following afterwards. Yeah, now he's 8. He's 8, and he helps with the charity, and he loves helping out, doesn't he?
He does.
He knows all about Isabella, and he's very proud.
There is now a new generation growing up who are too young to remember the tsunami. Children benefiting from the millions raised in response to the disaster. Some survivors have made great good come out of personal tragedy. Some survivors still struggle with the pain. But none will be the same people as they were on that morning of Boxing Day 2004.
One of the things that came for me was wanting to use my life well.
The thing that made me heal was having my family, and could never make my children scared of what I'm scared of, so it's made me be tougher.
For Pim, it's been a very long road towards healing.
Taking 10 years for me to overcome that. But now, what's funny about this is I find that I'm proud what have happened to me.
"10 years on, ceremonies will be held across the region to remember all those who died on that day. Whether at a public ceremony or in private contemplation, all will mark the moment that no one alive that day can ever forget."
There's very rarely a day that goes by, even after 10 years, when I don't think in some way about what happened then and the aftermath of it all.
You've been through something which was very tragic, which was, marked in history, and so you are a member of that Tsunami Club, I suppose.
It's really difficult to me because, you lost a half of your memory with the people who you really love. Like you erasing your memory, like you lost a half of your.
I survived that day for one reason or another, and I was meant to survive, to have my children. And as far as I think of life as of that day my new life began. And I see life as of from 2004, not before.
I'll never, ever stop feeling guilty for her death. So I suppose that's why I devote my life to making good things happen, so that some good comes out of all that awful, awful, awful time.
If you've been affected by any of the issues in this programme, you can go to our website, sky.com/tsunami, where there are links to organisations that can offer help. You can also find out more there about the charities mentioned in this programme.